Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name's Katie, I'm a full-time artist, and every couple of weeks here on YouTube I do a roundup because last year I started a daily art challenge. I share those 6 days a week over on Instagram, and then here on YouTube I do a roundup that's a little bit more chatty and I show you the work in more detail. So this is actually the last full 2 weeks of the daily art challenge because we are coming up to the end of it. So the next video that you'll see will be a week and 2 days, and I'll be sharing a little bit more about my thoughts and reflections on the challenge. So I've done a lot of sketchbook work in these couple of weeks, so we're going to jump right in and I'll show you what I've been creating. So to kick off week 50, day 294 was in my A5 Royal Talon sketchbook, and I created these nature thumbnails. So I've done a spread like this before in my sketchbook and it was really enjoyable, so I wanted to try it again. Again, I just searched for nature on a copyright-free website and just found some random photos and then I quickly put them into the sketchbook. So these are very loose and messy. I didn't spend very long on them. Obviously the larger ones did take longer, but I didn't have a timer or anything. I just know that I wanted it to stay loose, and to do that I usually work quickly. So I used Neocolors, brush pens and some coloured pencils for this, and I really love the way that it looks. I feel like the colour palette is cohesive even though I didn't actually have a set limited colour palette to use. There are definitely some thumbnails that I prefer more than others, but I'm really happy with this larger one on the right. I think that one works really nicely, and I also like some of these smaller ones. These two are probably my least favourite, those are the ones I did first. But overall I really like the style of spreads like this, and it's also really useful if you want to work out layout or composition of a larger piece. Then I recommend doing something like this because I think this one would work really nicely larger, and a couple of these as well. So a really nice way to fill a spread in my sketchbook, and also could be useful for future work. Day 295 is a spread which is similar to some previous sketchbook work where I've been filling the spread with just one subject, and this time it was pigeons. So this was surprisingly popular on Instagram. I was surprised at how much love these pigeons got, but I'm happy with them and I really like the texture and the colours. I really upped the saturation on their collar feathers with all the purple and green because I really felt like it needed a bit more colour. This was done with gouache first, and with all of these spreads like this I don't sketch, I just find the marks with my paint, and I talk a little bit more about that process and show it in my most recent studio vlog where I did the same with Magpies, which you'll see coming up in this recap. But I am happy with this spread. It was quite simple to do and I didn't add many details like around them, just a few little dots to show like the ground. And this was quite a quick spread, but I think it's really effective and they definitely have a lot of character which I feel like comes through. Day 296 I was still sticking with my A5 Royal Talons, but this time I did a full page landscape. And I recorded the process for this one and filmed it real time as a walkthrough, and that's available on my Patreon. So a patron had requested me doing sort of like a tutorial on how I approach a landscape like this, how I'd go about creating it, and how I use light and shade, and how I would show that in the illustration. So I talked through as I created this one, and I'm really pleased with how the video turned out. And I also love the result of the painting. So it is quite pastel. There's not like a huge amount of definition, but you can see how I kept things really light and loose at the back, and then I brought in more details towards the front. So it was really nice to see this one come together, and although it is loose and messy, like it's not very refined, I think it really adds to that sort of peaceful atmosphere of this lake scene. And this was referenced from a royalty-free website again, and I just added in this house because I love that it adds a bit of context and narrative. And as with all of these pieces, I will link the references down below if you're interested. But a really peaceful one, and I really find creating landscapes like this very in my comfort zone, so a nice easy one for this day. Day 297 was the penultimate day in our Swiss road trip, which is a virtual road trip series I've been doing in my little 12x12 Royal Talon sketchbook. And on this day we went to the iconic Matterhorn and a little town called Zermatt. So I actually think this is my favourite spread in that little road trip series so far. I'm really pleased with how this turned out. I was really nervous about doing this view. One of the good things about this series is that I leave my audience to decide my views. So I'll do all of the research and I'll put polls up on my Instagram stories, and then I'll see which is most popular. And this one, the choice was to go up for a hike up the Matterhorn, and the other option was less snowy. This was the glacier hike, I think, so it was very out of my comfort zone where I'm usually doing views like this, which are very green and very lush. So I was nervous about this one, but I'm so pleased with how it turned out. I think it really feels like the place I wanted it to be. I think it really shows how cold it is, but the sun is really shining there. And I love how I've managed to capture the snow, because I was nervous about that. I left a lot of like the page showing and then I filled it in with gouache. So I'm really chuffed that this one turned out nicely. And then this one I feel like balances it really well. Again, this is my comfort zone, so I wasn't too nervous about approaching this one. This was on the hike back down to the town, and this is like my usual greens that I love to use, and like the blue sky, and I just feel like they work really nicely together. Usually I find in this little project there's one page that I like more than the other. There's only one spread left on this project to show you, but I was really happy with this one, and like I said, I think this is my favourite of the road trip series so far. Day 298, I was back in the A5 sketchbook, and I've definitely felt like the A5 is my comfort zone these past few weeks, and I haven't branched into like looser pieces or the A4 sketchbook, but that's okay. I was really keen to finish this sketchbook, which I did manage to do, and on this day I wanted to experiment with some new mediums. So I bought some new soft pastels from Jackson's Art, and I will leave a link down below if you're interested in those, and those will be affiliate links. But it was really nice to use something different. Usually I use gouache or brush pens to create large amounts of colour on my page, whereas for this one I used the soft pastels. So I went onto Mapcrunch and it took me to Brecon in Wales. It was perfect for the colours of pastels which I bought. So I got a green, a blue, and then this sort of rusty orange. And it was perfect for doing these fields and then doing the sky. You can see it really adds a softness to the spread, which I think doesn't always come through. It really adds that softer texture, and it was really interesting to use them. They went down really smoothly and it wasn't like super rough. I did find it hard to blend it out, so you can see like over here where you can see where I put it down and then I sort of smudged it out with a paintbrush. I know a lot of people use sponges, which will be interesting if I try that. And also trying to use it in a different way, because here I just used it for big blocks of colour, but I think it would be interesting to experiment and use them for like details or as a layering or over the top. So it was really nice to use something new, and I'm really happy with these panels. Obviously this is very much in my comfort zone, and I fill my sketchbook with a lot of panel spreads like this. So yeah, quite an easy spread for me, but nice to try some new textures, and I definitely want to explore using those pastels a bit more. Day 299, and I filled my sketchbook page with some fish, and I did joke in the last recap that fish seem to be super popular on Instagram, and this again was no different. I don't know what it is about fish, but these did really well, and I really like how they turned out. Again, I did this on a timer, as with most of my fish spreads. This was 20 minutes, and again, I don't do any sketching first. I just find the shapes and the colours with my paintbrush, and it definitely makes the fish wonky and imperfect. So I think this one in particular is a lot longer, and same with this one. I've really like squished them down to get them onto this spread. But I really love the texture and the colours of them. I think like not having the sketch first really adds a lot of character and personality to them, and I'm really pleased with all the texture. So once I've done the gouache layer and that's dried, I go in with Neocolors and coloured pencils. I always amp up the saturation again, so this was referenced from my nature reference book, and although they don't look very like special on the page, taking them into my sketchbook and amping up the colours really helps sort of bring them into my style, because I do like to make things very colourful. And yeah, I'm really happy with these. fish are definitely quite easy for me to draw, and I feel like they're now in my comfort zone because I love the texture that the Neo colours add. I think that works really well for their scales, and a nice easy spread to create in 20 minutes. So on to week 51 and day 300 now. Again, I was in my A5 sketchbook, similar to the bird spreads I've done where I filled it with one subject, but this time I filled it with boats. And I was surprised again at how popular this was on Instagram. They're quite simple. I used some Ecoline brush pens and then some coloured pencils for all of the details. And I think there's some Neo colours in there too. Although boats are very different to my usual comfort zone of nature, I really enjoyed creating these, and I have done a spread like this before in my A4 sketchbook. But these ones are obviously at a much smaller scale, so the details are a lot smaller. But I really enjoy adding in all like the railings or the lines and things like that. And I really did enjoy drawing these. I tried to pick ones that were colourful again because I really like the way that they look. Although this is obviously very industrial, I definitely want to do more things like this. Maybe I could start drawing some cars or something and really try and expand out of my comfort zone and try more stuff, because I think that's really good as an artist to do that and not just like keep yourself in one place. Although you might enjoy doing one thing more than the other, I think it's really good to just push ourselves sometimes. And sometimes it works out really nicely like this. So really happy with this spread, and this is one of the new prints available in my shop update, and I will link that down below. Day 301, I was back on Google Maps and I dropped the pin down in Cornwall and found this view of Port Isaac. And I'm really happy with how this turned out. I'm really pleased with the colours. Again, this is kind of like the landscape view that I don't have to think much about, and I can just create and throw loads of colour and gouache on the page, and I really enjoy creating spreads like this. I always worry when I do these that I overwork them a little bit, especially the cliff area. I thought that maybe I'd added on a bit too much texture there, but overall I think it works nicely as a spread. I don't think I overworked it too much in the water. I kept that quite clear, especially towards the centre where there was more light hitting it. And like with the buildings up here on the cliffs, I think that works really nicely because I haven't added lines everywhere. You can kind of see that I've just added in colours for the roofs and then the windows, and then they kind of find themselves. So it's not accurate at all. There's obviously way more buildings and different colours there, but I think it works really well for a style of illustration like this. I accidentally added pink here, so I picked up the wrong brush pen, but I think that works nicely, and I do like adding pink to the grass here with the Neo colour. And I was really happy with how the spread turned out. Feels very Cornish, and I love the soft colours and the yellow-green shades, so I was really pleased with this one. Day 302 is the piece that I recorded for my studio vlog, so I'll link that up in the cards if you wanted to watch this one come together. But similar to the Pigeons and some of my other spreads, this one I filled with magpies. So these were definitely harder to do because they were mostly black, but I really wanted to pull out some of the colours that do come through in their feathers, especially when the light hits, such as the purples and the greens and turquoises. This one didn't do as well as the others, I think maybe because there is less texture there, so I do find it interesting with the daily art challenge when I do a similar thing and perhaps it doesn't connect with people in the same way. I was pleased with how these turned out. I really love magpies and I'm really happy with the pink that I added. Obviously, usually this is like greys, but I'm really pleased I added that in because I think it works well with the blues and the blacks. And this is actually the very last page in my sketchbook, so I was happy to end it on this one, and it's always a really good feeling to finish a sketchbook. Day 303, I moved into my brand new sketchbook, so this is the exact same brand and size as my pink one. These are the 13 by 20 centimeters sketchbooks by Royal Talons Art Creations. And because it was the first spread in my new sketchbook, I wanted to stick to my comfort zone, so I did another panel page. Again, I went on Mapcrunch, and that's a random Google Maps street view generator, and I love to use that when I'm stuck for what to draw. This time it took me to Somerset, and that again is perfect for my comfort zone because of the rolling green fields, the blue skies, and the little English cottages. So this was done with gouache and then coloured pencils for all of the details and to refine it a bit more. I don't think I used any near colours in this one, so it definitely has a softness to it. I haven't done a panel along the top like this before in any of my panel spreads, but it works very well with the Google Maps view because obviously it's a panoramic. So I'm really pleased that I did that in the long thin one at the top and then these two at the bottom. I'm really pleased with this one and like the tone of the building. This one I'm less pleased with because I don't think the road really works. I did have to change the view quite a bit to make it work in this square box, but I do like some of the details. I like the church windows and the telegraph poles at the back. Overall, this was very easy for me and I really enjoy creating spreads like this. It was nice to feel so confident in creating for the first spread because I know it can be a little bit daunting. So I'm really pleased it turned out well and it was a good start to this brand new sketchbook. Day 304 was our very last day of our Swiss road trip, so I was back in the 12x12 and this time we went to Geneva. This was day 8 of this trip, so it had been 8 weeks of doing these sort of views around Switzerland, and I definitely feel like that's long enough for a project for me. It's a really nice way to explore a country, and I've definitely learned loads about Switzerland whilst researching for this project. This time the options that was picked were to go to the Botanical Gardens and then to Castle Chillon. I'm really pleased with this view in the Botanical Gardens, so this was in one of their greenhouses. And it definitely took a lot of concentration to work out all the negative space. So what I did was work around all of the frames of the glass. I didn't use a white pencil, I just worked around that, if that makes sense. And I think it was really effective. I'm really pleased with how that turned out. It definitely was a lot of work, but I think it was worth it. And I really like the green tones in here. There was a lot of cacti and plants on the ground with the trees and things, so I think it worked out well considering that's not something I usually draw. And then over here we've got Lac Lemon here and then Castle Chillon in the distance. And I'm less happy with that one, but I do like the tones of the castle and the lighting. Something that I did different to this spread compared to all of the other ones in the series is that I only used coloured pencils. Usually I use gouache, like with the Matterhorn and the forest view. That was all gouache basically, and then some coloured pencil over the top, whereas for this one it was no gouache and just coloured pencils and some neocolours. And the reason I did that was basically because I started with this one, which needed me to be really refined because I was working in negative space in all these little panels, and I wanted the next page to match, so I decided to do that in coloured pencils too. Usually I would approach this scene with gouache, but I really wanted them to match, and I do think it works nicely. It definitely has the same texture and the same tones, and I do think that they sit nicely together, even though they're obviously very different views. So I was really pleased to end the Swiss road trip on a high. I'm definitely pleased with this project. I think it worked out really nicely, and I feel like it would make quite a nice zine or something if I collated it into like a mini book for my shop. I could definitely share a lot of my notes and things that I learned along the way and kind of make it as if it was an actual travel journal. I think that would be really fun. But I have so many different ideas in my head and not enough time to do them all, but I think that might be a good one for the future. So to end week 51 and day 305, I went back to my new sketchbook and created these two pieces, which are referenced from photos I took in the New Forest. I've done a spread similar to this in my pink sketchbook, where I painted a pink base first using acrylic and then I worked on top with gouache. And because they are such different mediums, obviously acrylic won't be water activated, whereas the gouache will. It creates really interesting textures and it's a very different way to working compared to acrylic on acrylic or gouache on gouache. And these were very quick pieces. They're very rough and not very refined, but I really like the character in here and I definitely love the lighting, which I think comes from the pink base. Having that there really helps create the warmth. This was taken at sunset and this was a little bit before, so I feel like that really comes through with the lighting. I really wanted more of a dramatic sky here, which I think comes through from all my scribbly near colours. And I am pleased with this one and the way that it's framed with these trees here. This one is at Lepe Beach and this one was further in to the New Forest. But I think that they work really nicely together even though they're not together in location. I think having the same colours on my colour palette works, and I really like to work together rather than doing this one and then not having a page here. I really enjoy working on one spread at a time rather than just one page at a time. But I really enjoyed this one and they were quite easy for me to do. I feel like it was a good end to the week. So that's the recap for weeks 50 and 51 of the Daily Art Challenge. At the end of these videos I always share my favourites, and I think, although I said that it was my favourite of the Swiss project, I actually think this is my favourite of the 2 weeks. I'm really pleased with this one, especially because it was out of my comfort zone and I think it worked out really nicely. So this spread is my favourite for these couple of weeks, but I'd love to know which piece was your favourite if you leave them down in the comments below. Like I said at the beginning, we are heading to the end of the daily art for a year, so there will only be one more recap video where I round up the last week and a bit of the Daily Art Challenge. I'm going to talk a little bit about my thoughts and reflections in that video, but like I mentioned in the last recap, I'm also going to do a whole video about starting a Daily Art Challenge for yourself. So if you have any questions, then please do pop them down in the comments and I'll be sure to include that in that video. I really appreciate you watching these. When I started doing the recaps, I was worried they would be boring, so I really appreciate it when you watch to the end. Thank you so much for coming along on my journey, and I will see you next week with a new video. See you later.